Hey, everybody, welcome to Root of the Podcast. My name is Kevin, and I'm the Connections Director, and we have Pastor Kevin Butcher with us today. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey, Kev.
It's really good to have you back. It's been a minute.
Great to be back. I've sort of missed it, if you can believe it, with all these wires and everything. You know how I get tangled up in all of it, but I'm glad to be sitting here across the screen from you.
I believe it. I'm hoping to jump right in and so I can kind of pick your brain and more importantly, your heart around the topic of resilience. And Pastor Mac was on this not too long ago, and we were talking a little bit about it because it feels like our rhythm seems to be, if things are going well, let's continue as pastors and Christian leaders to focus on the needs of everyone else because I'm good. And sometimes that happens while we're also neglecting, though, areas of rest or healing that we need. But it's fine because everyone else's needs are more pressing. And so we focus on that. That's our job, right? That's our calling. And then eventually we get to a place of burnout where we just can't go anymore and things start falling apart. And so then we seek help, we seek care and, things like that. We go on vacation, there's sabbaticals. And then we jump right back in to our former practice. Now, is there a way, for us to have a healthier rhythm in the more difficult times and the times that are a little bit easier, where we have more wins, so that we can kind of weather the storms when there's more L's, more losses. So anyways, that's kind of the general context of this conversation. So I'm just curious what's immediately on your mind already as I'm sharing that.
Well, I fear sounding like a broken record, Kev, for any of our listeners or those who are tuning in who have read anything I've written, especially probably my second book. This theme of living desperately is so front and center for me that whether we're in a time of peace or a time of war, a time of plenty or a time of need, in our personal journey, if we're married with our spouses, if we have kids with our children, with our neighbors, with our churches, with our speaking ministry, with our writing, with our elder boards, our staff, any of it. Anytime we're breathing on the planet, we're intended by God to know deep inside that we are desperate for intimacy with Him. The Genesis 2:25 paradigm where Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed. And they were just open. They were content. They were centered. I think I'm not the only person who believes that little moment right before the fall, right before the serpent and his invitation to say that God's love wasn't enough and that we needed to kind of guide our steps through this tree of knowledge of good and evil that we needed to sort out as we walk through life. Many scholars and pastors like myself believe that Genesis 2:25 was intended to be our eternal state. Naked, nothing to hide, totally open, totally fulfilled in relational community, not only with our partner, or as Adam and Eve procreated, our partners, but with God Himself, naked and not ashamed. That was home. So I'm not saying there aren't some things that we can be about when things get really, really tough in life, for sure. But I'm wondering if there's intended to be a very different rhythm during the bad times as versus the good, but whether we're intended to get up every morning and say, my heart is longing for Him. My heart is longing for His love. Ephesians 3 that we've talked about so many times in this podcast, that to be rooted and grounded in the love of God in Christ is to be filled with all the fullness of God. So to get up every day, even in the best of times, and to begin to move toward Him, knowing that He is already there moving toward us. That's the first rhythm.
Okay.
And then maybe the second rhythm that occurs to me, that again is true both in want and in plenty, is to quote Kurt Thompson, or to use his terminology, we need a confessional community. On my best days, I need the body of Christ. I need some brothers and sisters that I know are pursuing me in my story. They are coming for me. Again, to quote Kurt Thompson, I don't have to function like a praying mantis in a jar, that's being flicked by somebody's finger. I don't have to perform to get Kevin Hu to see me. He loves me. Kevin is moving toward me. And as I share where my story is on that particular day, Kevin is, to use the psychological terms, Kevin is attuned to me. Kevin Hu is attuned to me. And that attunement centers me in the love of Christ. Kevin literally serves as a vehicle, along with Becca, along with William Mack, along with Tori Mack, along with Ron and Pam Pangborn, along with Andrea and Dusty DeSanto, just to talk about our rooted community. That attunement centers me in the moment in the love of Christ. I cannot live, whether in good times or bad, without that community that mirrors Christ to me. So living with desperation, I've got to have him today. I've got to know his love. I've got to live in those Luke 15 arms of compassion, if you will, with the Father, his arms around me, abiding in his love. And secondly, I must have that love mediated via a community of brothers and sisters. Not doesn't have to be a mega church, but in fact, our story can't be known that intimately by too many. But whatever we have on a Sunday morning with somebody doing some preaching, some good Bible teaching, and some good worship music or whatever, I've got to have a community that sees me. To use Dan Siegel's words, I need to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure every day. Not coddled, but seen. That's how that love that I'm so desperately looking for is in a great way mediated toward me in good times and in bad times. Those are the two things that occur to me, Kev.
Those are huge. So I something to say about the first thing you shared, and then coming to the second, just to help me differentiate a couple of things. The first, though, was, you talk about this desperation for God, for the love of God, to know him, to have that intimacy with him. And it makes me kind of like think about how, depending on which version of me you're talking to and encouraging me with,
right,
as like, the 20-year-old me, 30-year-old, 40-year-old me, I have this like idea of what that means and what that feels like experientially, where I might actually say, I think I know what that means, or to the best of my ability, I know what that means. But as I go through life, as I take the hits, earn my stripes, put it that way, desperation means something so much more deeper and real and essential to me as I've been through it, as I've been hurt, as I've hurt others, as I've come to those realizations, right? So it's like experience is required for me.
To teach me desperation. Yeah, I agree.
To teach me desperation. So I think to a certain extent, I go, like, gosh, I don't know if I would fully absorb it to the depth that, I am now if you had said this to me at 25.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's a certain element of that, of like, the truth is the truth, right? That is the truth. We were created for that. And so I hold on to that, knowing well that like that truth has become so much sweeter as I've aged and
so
as
true,
I've
Kev.
been through it. Right. So to me, that's like a kind of a gradual linear thing. But the community piece that you're talking about, that is something that I don't think I had much of early on, especially earlier on in ministry. And I wanted to differentiate something or ask you about this, because I had a ton of friends in the church and in ministry and in life. I did. And I never felt alone in that sense. But I feel like the way you're describing this community is a little different than just friendships. People that I can just talk about sports with and life with and my kids. And there is something deeper. So can you kind of further differentiate that a little bit, and by, why, like, what the differences are? And so if folks are in kind of in that same camp thinking like, wait, I have a lot of friends, I have a lot of community, I go to dinners all the time and baseball games, and we talk about the Nuggets. Sorry if you're not a Nuggets fan. Talking about the Nuggets or the Colorado Avalanche, and we're just filling our spaces. But you're describing something even deeper than that, even more intimate than that. What are some things that differentiate?
Well, with our buddies, and again, you can talk about the Nuggets or the Chicago Bears or, the Chicago Cubs or the Rockies or whoever. You
No
can
one's
you can
talking about the
talk,
Rockies. Okay.
nonsense or just having fun also with those who form a part of what you might call your confessional community. So it doesn't have to be all like if Kevin, if you're a part of my confessional community and you see me and you pursue me in my story, it doesn't, every time I see you, it doesn't, we don't have to cry together.
Right.
In fact, I've been listening to this, one of Kurt Thompson's podcast where his producer is clearly a part of his confessional community. I guess it's his producer, a guy named Pepper. And the other day, they laugh a lot. They tell really corny jokes. They tell inside stuff that you're sitting there going, I don't understand what they're talking about, but they're laughing. I'm very aware of the joy they share together. And then the other day, Thompson said on the podcast, it was a January podcast, and he said, I've had a really rough Christmas season. There was a lot of loss in the last several months or the last year or whatever. And he said, I'm very aware today that I don't want to misquote him, but something like, I wasn't necessarily really primed to come on this podcast. Yeah. But when I see you, Pepper, and then he got a little choked up. He said, now I'm getting choked up. He said, when I see you, Pepper, he said something to the effect of, it all is well in my soul because I know you see me. You're here for me. You're a part of my heart. So I want to make it clear that, Carla's a part of my wife is a part of my confessional community. Thank God. But we laugh all the time. She's hilarious. It's one of the joys of our marriage. But I think you can have buddies that you just laugh with or have a beer with or whatever, that you really don't tell the truth of your story because you don't intuit that they can handle it or that they are desiring it. Like Kevin, one of the things I've sensed about you is that when you ask me a question, I intuit that you really, really want to know an honest answer. You want the truth of my story, the joy, the sorrow, and anything in between. You are inviting me into a safe place that is your heart, and that is your eyes, that is your hand on my shoulder or whatever. Even as an older brother, you're inviting me into a space where I can truly be seen. Back in the day, we might have said that space was reserved in some ways for the therapist's office. In fact, one of the conclusions of the neurobiological community about therapy, after studying the brain for 50 or 60 years, however long that science has been a thing, is that the most important part of the relationship between a client and the therapist is the relationship. Whatever little nuggets of wisdom or perspective that are shared, and hopefully there will be some shared, the most important point is that client feels attuned to by that therapist, that client doesn't sense the therapist is there just to make a buck. They're frankly a bit bored with the whole process or just rather neutral in terms of their interest. Healing begins, according to the neurobiological community, in that therapeutic setting when the client brings their true story into the room and feels attuned to and cared for in that story. Well, I think, and again, not to act like Kurt Thompson is the only voice on this, but he says that's what the church was intended to be. And when I read 1 Corinthians 12 and then 1 Corinthians 14 about the gifts in the body and how the body can work during tough times, and then in the middle, Paul says, let me just tell you what the most excellent way is here to get this communal thing done. And then he talks about love and the power of love, the power of tuning in via love, seeing people, being present to them, not leaving when there's trouble. So that's what I think many of us have too little of.
Wow.
You can go to church for 50 years and never have that. You can be in a family system, by the way, where food is on the table. Now, I'm quoting another therapist, Adam Young, up here in Fort Collins. You can go to church or be in a family system where they go to church every week. There's food on the table every night. Thank God for both those things. Where there's money in the college fund, but you never feel seen. You feel judged, maybe. You feel categorized. You feel looked beyond. You feel used, but you don't feel seen. And it's in that seeing that healing begins to occur. So I hope some of those clarifications are helpful.
One more, if I may ask. How about spiritual maturity of the community that you're seeking out for this? Because I guess in my mind, I'm trying to, like, as you're sharing, I'm thinking back to a lot of the communities I had, and I had a ton of brothers and sisters who were there and listening and essentially crying with me, for me, all the good stuff. And I did feel safe, and I did feel seen. But like one key brother that was in my life during some of the more difficult times, he was never a believer, and he tried to understand and relate to, but almost every time he shared, there's going to be a natural pivot. He wasn't trying to fix me, or fix my situation. He was one of those guys that was really good at listening. But eventually, the kinds of questions that kind of steer my processes and discernment was steering me in a direction that even I sat there and it jarred me a little bit. And of like, wait, there's like, I don't want to live in a world where you're trying to take me right now. Which is, there is no truth, there is no God, that people ultimately aren't trustworthy, that there is no redemption. And so it's interesting that I had both the safe element to be able to feel like I could be fully open,
of course,
but then instantly feel like hopeless in the context of that what you're describing to me as like a very sacred space and community. But then if I'm just thinking like through the different levels, right? Like on one hand, you've got your group of friends and community that you can spend 90% of your day with and never get to the depth and feel like you can share your story and they can hold that story.
Yeah.
So there's that. Then there's the folks who are really excellent at really just being with you and hearing you. And then I think like you're describing this, like, to me, this like upper echelon, this spiritual elite community where they're your buddies. You can share about anything, just hang out and not talk about anything serious if you didn't need to. You didn't feel pressure to. But if you opened up, you knew they'd be right there with you.
Yeah, that's right.
But they're also tapped into a deeper hope and a deeper love and a deeper power in Christ that can hold you and walk with you toward Him. Am I missing something, or am I oversimplifying something?
And I want to make sure I don't miss your question or what you're trying to get to. Well, here's a story that comes to mind that I think echoes a little bit about what you're talking about. And I've told this story. I told this story in Free, and I've told it to you before, Kevin. I probably told it on this podcast, but it was that story of me being in a Detroit airport, went to have dinner before I caught a plane back in the day. And this young waitress that was serving me, doing a good job, but I could tell she was in pain, left her a big tip at the table. And then I asked the maitre d' if he would call her up. And I gently asked her permission to share something with her. And she said, yeah, go ahead. And I said, I can sense, young lady, that you're in pain. And I said, I just couldn't ignore it. I couldn't just walk out the door. And I want you to know that I believe in a God who sees us in our pain and who cares about us in our pain. And I think He wants me to share with you today that you're not alone, that He sees you and whatever's going on. And I don't know what that is, and you don't need to tell me, that you're not alone, that He sees you. He is right there with you. And of course, I slipped her another 20 at that point. Her hands flew up to her face, Kev. She was so overwhelmed. And I can't be for sure because she ran out to the restroom and I had to go catch a plane, and I've never seen her again. But my suspicion is that it was overwhelming for her to feel seen, not just by another human being, but potentially, theoretically, by a God who maybe she had considered it distant and maybe rather uncaring. And to think that somehow, so randomly in a restaurant where the goal is to eat, have good food, have good service, and get the heck out, she was seen. And I moved toward her in a way that hopefully soothed her spirit and helped her feel safe and secure. Without that God piece, I mean, God is, look, this is my theology. Anytime anyone, even your buddy back in the day that you said moved towards you and you could tell was really with you in your story, but didn't have much perspective or hope, God is in it every time one human being moves toward another with true care and true seeing. But I would suggest that ultimately, without the God piece who sees us, it's left hollow and empty, because you find yourself intuiting this question: what's the point? I mean, good that you see me, but I'm still in a boatload of pain. And I feel momentarily soothed, and I feel momentarily connected, and there's some degree of healing in that. But if there's not a larger picture where God is seeing us through us seeing one another, then first of all, that person on the other side of us their love for you might not be sustainable. My suspicion is that those who are most sustaining in their love, seeing, soothing, helping others feel safe and secure, are those who feel that from God. There's a hope and a perspective in that we're giving away. And it's not dependent upon the response of the other person. It's only dependent upon the fact that they stay desperately tuned in to the God who's tuned in to them. And then they give that away, and they give it away because God keeps giving it away to them. And then at the end of the day, even if there's no solution, and most of the time when we tell our story in the deepest pain, there's no answer.
Right.
There's just love, man, that's surrounding that place. Then, like Thompson writes in his most recent book about Romans 5:1-5, moving from suffering toward hope, as we continue to pursue one another with the love of Christ in those tough moments of pain and battle. Ultimately, there's a hope that is birthed in us that is not mere wishful thinking. It's the hope that there's something greater than this present moment. There's something greater than this present pain. There literally is the whisper and the glimpse in that relationship of a glory that one day will produce a new heavens and a new earth and new relationships where pain will be no more. I don't know if I've answered your question or given perspective, but I think I have. In a roundabout way, maybe.
No. That's everything. That's very good. I'm just trying to put myself now in the shoes of folks who are hearing all of this in a way kind of for the first time. Yeah. They're going, oh, wait, the community that I thought I had, which is great, really can't. And I don't know if it ever can be.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing this and I'm tapping into it, Kevin. Like, I think I'm following you here, but I don't know where to start. Like, I don't even know. Like, I don't want to ask anybody. Maybe I feel too ashamed to invite someone into that space. Like, hey, can you be my mentor, my spiritual director, my Christian accountability group? Like, we're like, okay, so give us kind of
not
like
that.
But what is that? What is the step?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we're here rooted pastors. This is what we do.
It's what we do.
Come alongside pastors, Christian leaders, right? And some folks are already connected, but others are looking also for more in the sense of maybe a local community or whatever. What are some of the things that, if you could encourage folks as we close up here, to even look for, to pray for, and how to even begin those steps toward finding that kind of healing and confessional community?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. And there's no perfect answer, of course, because we're all broken.
Right.
And some of us are so broken that we don't have much to offer in terms of pursuing someone in their story, because our brokenness basically leaves us fairly self-absorbed. And we don't have true room for another person's story. And I'm not judging that person. I think that's usually a result of pain, long-term pain sometimes. We're surviving. Not everyone is going to be able to be present to us in our story without trying to fix us, not trying to throw some Bible verses at us, not trying to categorize us in some way, maybe even in the worst cases, judge us. So it's going to take some patience. I wouldn't invite anyone right now just to walk away from their church because they're saying, yeah, I don't have anybody like that here. I would suspect there are people like that there in your community of faith that also maybe unconsciously are looking for someone, looking for them with this kind of love and delight in seeing. Because that's the way God's made us. I don't know if we've said that clearly enough. God has wired our brains to look for someone looking for us with love and delight, with this kind of seeing that we're talking about, this kind of attunement. Our brains are wired for that attunement. So what would it be like if someone maybe in our listening audience, I mean, if they're a pastor, I'd say, please email us. Let's start to connect.
Yeah.
But someone who doesn't really know what to do, what if you sat with the Lord and you said, Father, I can see now, I'm not looking to be fixed. Obviously, I'd love it if all my pain went away, but that's not really what I'm looking for. The trauma is one thing. I'm feeling alone in the pain and trauma. I don't know if anybody sees me. People are using me. People like me to teach Sunday school for them, or they like me to, I don't know, go to their friend group or whatever. But does anybody really see me? Is anybody really pursuing me? Father, I'm going to take some risks. I'm going to start with one person that I think just came to my mind that could possibly be that person. And I'm going to ask them if they wouldn't mind maybe getting together where we can just share our story with one another. And basically the story meaning, here's where I am today. And yeah, at a certain point, you would talk about how you got to where you are today. And then 2 weeks later, you'd share where you are this day, because our story is never told the same way twice, because we're always growing, we're always changing. What would it be like to simply ask the Lord for one person? And you'll have to take a risk to ask someone that you think just may be a person that can be with you in your story. And you can make clear the boundaries. I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm not going to try to fix you. But I think I need somebody to be with me, to walk with me, ask me questions. Be curious is a word that I've heard a lot in the Thompson communities. To be curious, lovingly curious about one another's stories, and see if God answers that prayer. I have a feeling he just might. And I'm going to encourage you, even if you have one or two instances where it just doesn't work out, the enemy will probably try to whisper to you, yeah, there's really no one for you. And that's a lie. There is someone there in your purview, I'm trusting, that will see you. And keep asking God for courage to continue to reach out. And in the meanwhile, some of us who are in the deepest pain might need to seek out a therapist to kind of kickstart that entire process. And I will just say, ask around. This is the best way to find a therapist that I've found. And I've had this validated by other therapists. Ask around about who people are seeing and who people feel like is true, a therapist that is truly not only clinically skilled, but is deeply compassionate and caring. And if you ask around enough, you'll begin to find a trail, a breadcrumb trail that leads to an office where there might be one or two or three therapists that really have done the work, let's use this phraseology, on their own story. They've done the work on their own story, so they know how to be present to someone else in their story. So those would be the two pathways, Kev, that I think I would suggest. Ask the Lord for someone. And in the meanwhile, maybe even begin to think about seeking out a therapist who might attune to you and your story as you do your journey with the Lord.
I love it. Thank you, Kevin.
You bet, Kev.
Thanks for sharing your insights as always, but more importantly, your heart. Your heart, especially for those who are leading and sometimes feeling like they're on an island and just needing to hear a voice of comfort, of just invitation, I think, to know that we're not walking alone, to know that there are people that know it, that are with them, to know that there are resources. And I'll just throw it out one more time. Those of you who are listening, who maybe have just been listening on the podcast, I don't know how you found us. I'm glad you did. But Rooted Pastors exists to walk with Christian leaders, with pastors and spouses too, because we know when we're married, it's not just, oh, you're the pastor and that's, whatever. It affects everyone, especially our spouses and our families. And so we are here for all of that. And so if you can't find someone, you're praying, and maybe God is just saying, connect with someone from Rooted Pastors. There's plenty of information on how at rootedpastors.org. And we would love to hear from you if you don't have anyone walking with you already. So,
and Kevin, I'd just like to share this too on the other side of what you just shared.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know us, all 5 of our team, this is absolutely not simply a job. Our caregiving team, and that includes our support team, every day we think about how can we create more space to be with other brothers and sisters in Christ, especially our leadership friends, pastor friends, and their spouses. How can we create more space to be present to their story? So just so you know, if you click on that link on our website, we're praying for you already. We really deeply care because we are you. Back in the day, we struggled to have anyone really pursue us. I mean, we felt used often, and there were a few. If anybody from my past churches is listening, I don't want them to think, well, I was there for you. Yes, there are always a few. But there were so many that, just brought their pain to the table. God loved them. And when we weren't able to fix that pain, I mean, they basically just said, see you later, alligator. And it hurt. And there were so many moments of intense aloneness for my wife and myself. And I know, Kevin, for you and Becca, for William and Tori, and for Pam and Ron, and even for Andrea and Dusty at times, all of our team, that we are absolutely trying to create space for your story. So if you feel called or led to get in touch with us, we will do our best to be right there with you, with our hearts. I promise.
That's right. Okay, thank you again.
You bet,
for joining
Kev.
this week's
Such a delight
podcast.
Always to be in your presence.